You're listening to the Beyond Podcast with your host, Timmy Riggs. Today, we interview my senior pastor and the pastor of Bethany First Church, Pastor Rick Harvey, about being an overcomer. Hope you enjoy. Hey guys, welcome to the Beyond Podcast. I am here with Pastor Ricky Wayne. We're figuring it out.
We are.
Yeah, and we're going to figure this year out just like we figured out 2020, right? So, hey, before we get started, tell us just a quick highlight or a quick story about your Christmas.
Oh, Christmas was it was different, like everything is different right now during the season of COVID. But I did get to see family. We went and spent a few days with my daughter Brittany, her husband Tim, my granddaughter Sadie, and I did get to stop by and see Annette's mom, and we saw my mom briefly. Highlight would be my mother is dealing with macular degeneration. She can't read any longer, and so she had told me that she was really missing being able to read the Bible, and now she's struggling to see her phone to push the speaker button where she can listen. And so I took an Echo Dot by and plugged it in and set it up for her and said, "Okay, Mom, here's all you do. You just say, Alexa, open the YouVersion of the Bible." And so my mom said, Alexis, or Alicia.
Alicia.
Yeah. That's what it was, Alicia.
That's exactly, that's hilarious.
So anyway, but she figured it out. And so it was cool. She called me the other night. She goes, "I'm listening to the Bible every night, and I love it. And I've even learned how to ask Alexa to play Gaither music." So she goes, "I listen to music, and I listen to the Bible, and it's awesome." So it was awesome getting to, celebrate
really cool.
that with her. Yeah. How about you?
When you told that story, and the stories that you tell of your mom, I could just kind of picture her sitting there listening, and it being really meaningful and impactful. And I think even that, how easy it is to take something for granted, like reading scripture.
Yeah. Got to give a shout out. My mother, one person said, if I ever met a true Christian, I think I would become one, I think it was Ingersoll, maybe a skeptic years ago. And I remember when I heard that, my response was, I think I'm a Christian today because I did see one.
Yeah.
Because of the way my mom lived her life in front of me. That was awesome.
That's so good.
You had a good Christmas.
We did. We had a great Christmas. And you know what I got from my in-laws? I got a brand new nice push cart for golf.
No way.
So you might see me out there a couple times this spring. But anyway, hey,
if we just had a swing.
Yeah. Now I got to get lessons. So we'll get started here. And you just preached a great sermon to kick off our Overcomer series. And I have the privilege and the honor to get to sit in and watch your process of writing sermons, right? So we have kind of series planning and sermon planning, and we try to be, handfuls of weeks out, and especially when the new year comes around. So you have been feeling this desire to talk about this idea that, hey, when we're in Christ, like Paul, like the apostles, like so many other biblical characters and people that you see in real life, like your mom, that they're overcomers when life maybe throws a couple sucker punches or just the regular day in, day out kind of parts of life. And so you were like, hey, let's start this year talking about that we are overcomers. So can you give me a little bit more background on what kind of inspired that?
I was beginning to think about how do you move into 2021, knowing that a lot was not going to change from December the 31st till January the 1st of 2021. We were still going to be in the midst of COVID. Numbers were still going to be on the rise, and all of that was going to be happening. And one night I was on a Zoom call with a group of pastors, and one of the pastors shared a devotional, and he read from 2 Corinthians. And I remember just grabbing my Bible and popping it open because what he was saying was really speaking to me, and it was more personal first. I didn't immediately think, hey, I should preach from this in January. It was more of God just ministering to me. We're not giving up. How could we? It was just such great words. God comes alongside us when we go through hard times. I mean, they were just words that were speaking and breathing life into me, and so I was so motivated by it that I was just kind of living personally with that pastor. passage, and then it occurred to me, man, this would be a great thing to start 2021 with. And so I had someone say to me this morning, when I read, these words of Paul from 2 Corinthians in the Message version of the Bible, she said, it's like God is just speaking right into my life right now. And so that's kind of how I felt. And so decided, why don't we spend maybe 3 or 4 weeks or so in 2 Corinthians when we start the new year talking about how we live as overcomers.
Yeah, that's so good. Do you have the passage pulled up right now?
I do.
Yeah, go ahead and read it in your like you read it.
So in the Message version, here's what Paul says, and I'll start with verse 3. He kind of begins with introductions, but all praise to the God and Father of our Master Jesus the Messiah, the Father of all mercy, God of all healing counsel. He comes alongside us when we go through hard times, and before you know it, he brings alongside someone else who is going through hard times, so that we can be there for that person just as God was there for us. We have plenty of hard times, he says, that come from following the Messiah, but no more so than the good times of his healing comfort. We get a full measure of that too. So I just think it's just great stuff.
Yeah, it's so awesome. And I remember when you read it the first time, how just listening to you read it to us in a little group, there's something, obviously, it's the hearing of the word. That's what Scripture talks about. Faith is built through the hearing of the word.
Right.
So you speaking it was really meaningful. So I want to get into a little bit later, and we will, because you talked about it in your sermon, but okay, why does it matter? Who's this Paul guy? Why does it matter? So let's make sure we hit that, because I think that's important. But you kind of started your sermon with this idea of, hey, do you feel like an overcomer? And some people do. I loved your metaphor of like, if you throw a cat, they're going to land on their feet. And some people kind of feel that way, no matter what, right?
So you're that way.
You're going to figure it out. Well, I thank you. Yeah. And before we get started, that's what I kind of feel that way too, And you brought up the good question about why I'm that way. Do you remember?
No.
You said, is it your personality or is it faith?
Yeah.
And I think it's one of those nature nurture things,
Yeah.
And I think obviously it's really easy for me to say, well, I think faith has maybe created parts of my personality that maybe wouldn't have been there if I didn't have faith.
I think it's always true that some people may live more with the mindset of overcoming than others will with all the grace they can get from God. I may never be where you are in that conversation.
Probably not.
Probably not. I think you're wired. Truly, you're very positive. I'm always looking at things saying, how would Timmy say this? Because I tease you about that some, but you see things from such an optimistic, vantage point, and I want to see things from there too. So I do think that there's a personality here that we can't ignore. That some people, by nature, seem to be a little more pessimistic or a little more optimistic than others. But the nature nurture. Talk to me about what you mean by that.
Well, so I think that obviously when we're born and we have our certain genes, and then you grow up and your environment is going to kind of connect with that and shape who you are. When I was like 6 or 7, I was in something, VBS, Sunday school, who knows, but I had to pick a favorite Bible verse, right? Yeah. And I just clung. There was just something about when Jesus says, hey, don't worry. Don't worry about what you're going to wear, what you're going to eat. And I think my parents were already really instilling that in me. But that idea of, hey, if Jesus says it, then he probably means it, right? So for my entire life, that has been something that I've tried to live by, and I just think that when you are beginning your faith, especially early in life, and you have something that you can kind of anchor to, it's going to create this kind of personality in you. And I think when there's parts of Jesus, you and I have talked about this before, like I think there are certain different characteristics of Jesus, and each of us sometimes lean into a specific one. I like party Jesus, I like when he's going to people's houses, he's celebrating, he's having a good time. Some people really lean into restful Jesus or justice Jesus or whatever. And it all makes him, and we're obviously supposed to live into all those things. But that's one of the things that I love most about Jesus.
I like what you're saying, but that does not mean that you don't go through hard times. I mean, you and I have had conversations about days when you weren't feeling on top of the world, when you were dealing with things. So all of us have troubles. All of us have struggles that we go through. It's just saying that I'm not going to be defeated. I'm not going to live my life overcome, but I'm going to be an overcomer. And I love those two words somehow. Am I an overcomer, or do I kind of live my life overcome by my circumstances, my problems, my troubles? We talked a little bit yesterday about Eeyore.
Well, and that's what I loved about your question was, we basically have these two dispositions, living as an overcomer or living overcome. And yeah, you bring up Winnie the Pooh, which he's so profound, a little bear in a cartoon. But when you said it, what was his line that you had Winnie say?
I always get to where I'm going by leaving where I've been.
And you're like, wow, that's duh. But it sounds so profound. But then your things about Eeyore, we all know an Eeyore. Name a few. No, I'm just kidding. There's some Eeyores that you work with, right? But you had your line at Eeyore too, like, hey, can things get worse? Probably, and they will. And I think that there's a lot of people that live with that mindset.
Yeah, Eeyore, he lives his life overcome. He doesn't live his life over the circumstances. He lives under them. He can't seem to get on top. He sees everything pretty pessimistically. And none of us want to be. And I don't think any of us desire to live that way. We want to be overcomers. We want to be people who say, I don't live my life defeated. But for those of us who follow Christ, we don't base that on like our own kind of self-will, or we don't rely on a personality. It's truly based on the fact that we are not alone, that God comes alongside us when we go through hard times. And therefore, that's what we base the overcoming power on. It's that God is with me. I'm not doing this on my own. Yeah. I'm not just pulling myself up by my bootstraps. I'm not just kind of, willing myself into a more positive attitude. It's truly based in the fact that God walks with me. When I go through hard times, He comes along beside me. And so, I'm relying on His power. Not mine. I'm relying on His strength, not mine. I'm relying on His presence, not mine.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. So why do we believe that, right? So we'll break it down. 66 books in the Bible. We have 39 in the Old Testament. So that leaves what? I'm terrible at math. Is there 27 in the New Testament? Okay. 27 in the New Testament. And out of those New Testament books, there are a lot of letters, right? So we get to 2 Corinthians, and that's the second letter to the people of Corinth. Okay. And so you keep name dropping this guy Paul, and that's what you said in your sermon, and we've kind of brought it up here. Yeah. So if someone's listening, they're like, who's Paul? And why do I care what Paul has to say? Tell us a little bit about why Paul matters and why his words matter.
Well, Paul, was not always a follower of Jesus. He was a devout Jew, but one day he has this incredible encounter. And I think it's in some ways, I didn't see the bright light and I didn't lose my eyesight, but I had an incredible encounter with Jesus. And my life was changed forever. And so Paul's life was changed forever. He becomes a follower of Jesus. But you got to remember, Paul is not a guy without troubles. I mean, he is going through all kinds of stuff. He's got issues with the Corinthian church. They question his authority. At this point, he's suffering from rejection by many of them. He deals with everyday problems like everybody deals with. Everybody has everyday troubles. And on top of that, he's dealing with a lot of persecution. I mean, this guy, I don't think you can, underemphasize the many times that he was beaten up. He talks about beaten with rods, beaten with a whip. I mean, can you imagine being beaten with a whip? And a night and a day, I think he said he spent in the deep, lost in the ocean is what he was trying to refer to. And, he says, I bear on my body the marks of Christ. So this guy has lots of troubles in his life.
It's terrible. You ever hit your head on a cabinet or something and you just immediately think man, I would hate to get beat up. I wouldn't be very good at getting hurt a lot, And Paul is over here the opposite.
Yeah, nobody has ever hit mama's baby in the face. Yeah. And I've never experienced that, and I don't want to ever experience it. But yeah, he's getting beaten. I mean, a mob of people are literally physically beating him.
So with that said,
unconscious. They left him for dead.
And it would have been expected. Like, he's the guy that you like the wink and the gun to, and you're like, hey, it's okay if you kind of want to feel overcome.
Yeah.
But he's not.
Yeah, instead he has this attitude, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength, And
which is what that verse really means.
Yeah.
When it's not taken out of context, it means, hey, whether I have plenty or I have little, I've learned what it's like to be content.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the rest of that verse is incredible, and it's one that we sometimes want to shy away from because I don't know, there's this desire to equate being a Christian with a real comfortable, easy life. And that was never what Paul talked about at all. Yeah.
Man. So he tells us, so what's you read the passage, but when Paul's saying, so that's his background, right?
Yeah,
That's
right.
what I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. So we know his background, and then he has this passage that God walks alongside us, and that he is the comforter. You mentioned that Paul, more than anyone, uses the word comfort. What I'm wondering is, how can we explain that comfort to people? Maybe someone who's like, I've never felt God's comfort. That throws me off. I don't really get it. What were some ways that you think, well, here's how God comforts us?
Yeah, when I think about my own experience, it comes more often than not in early mornings, and it's not only early mornings, but when I'm with the Word of God, trying to. I feel like every day you have to reset. The world's telling you lies all the time, and trying to influence you. There's lots of voices, and you've got to keep the voice of God coming. So early in the morning you get up and you get alone with God's Word. And so, hey, first of the year, right? And so I don't do this every year, but I'm going to read through the Bible this year, and I'm using a different version, and I'm listening some too. Like this morning, I listened, but it's often in those times where God just you get to push the reset, and okay, God, tell me the truth, because I'm getting a lot of lies, and what are the values that I should be mostly concerned about, because you're getting all kinds of information, but it's often there that God just speaks to me clearly, and sometimes it's like, Ricky, I love you more than you'll ever imagine. And sometimes it's like, Ricky, what are you thinking? But often it's those times. Or when I was with my kids at Christmas this year, I felt overwhelmed, grateful for my family. And it was just God saying, yeah, this is one of the ways that I love you, But when you find yourself in those trying times, I remember, have I ever told you about the time I broke my hip?
No idea. Tell me more.
I've gotten a lot of mileage out of that story.
It's good. Let's get it one more time. There's some new listeners here.
Oh no! But in that season, I felt so close to God.
So tell us that moment. Let's not do the whole story. We don't have enough time for that. But let's talk. I think that is a perfect example. So Ricky Wayne here, the good husband that he is, comes out of a restaurant. I'll tell it. I'll tell the fast version. Comes out of a restaurant, okay, and he's like, "Honey, it's drizzling a little bit, and it's freezing outside." It's like
it wasn't
30.
raining though; it was just cold.
Well, don't tell people. Okay, freezing rain. Okay, and you say, "Stay here. I'll go get the car." And as you're going that way, you slipped on a shoestring and fell and broke your hip. Right? Okay, I know. Yeah, somehow you fell. All right, but the comfort comes in the lady that didn't know you at all. So tell that part of the story.
Yeah. So I roll over and I realize at this point my leg's broken. I get my arm in the air, wave down this Odyssey Honda van, and this couple gets out, stands in their doors, both open their door, stands in their door, and they say, "Are you okay?" And I say, "No, I've broken my leg. My wife's in the lobby of the restaurant. Would you go get her?" And so this guy goes in to get my wife, but the lady, who we assume is maybe in her 70s, comes over on this very cold night and gets down on her knees, and I'm laying on my side, but I'm not going to move again. That's the only time I'm going to move. And my head is just kind of hanging to the side, and she interlocks her fingers and she cradles my head in her hands. And here's what she says to me: "I won't leave you." You know, and it taught me a lot. You know, I think I learned something about ministry and the importance of presence. Just being there, just having somebody there with me. That was huge.
Yeah.
You know, and she stayed with me until they took me to the hospital. And then she prayed with Annette, which was awesome. But we don't know who she is. We don't have any way of contacting her and thanking her and him. But
well, we got the story out here a couple hundred times. Eventually, she'll hear it. So I'm just kidding. I think that is such a perfect actual moment of God comforting you in struggle.
Exactly. God came alongside me during my hard time through this moment. And she says after she prays, just tell your husband that a couple of Methodists will be praying for him.
Yeah, that's so cool.
My favorite line in this story is people ask me, do you think they were angels? And I say, no, I think they were just Methodists.
Yeah. And that's kind of, we'll get into that in a second. I have one more quote that I really liked that you said, but basically we'll get to and we'll wrap it up with this idea of, hey, it is about others, so even this whole being an overcomer is, well, because we're going to be able to show other people that they can make it through. But before we get there, I loved this line. You said, if your mindset is, I'm going to be an overcomer when finally all my problems are gone and out of my way, then you are never going to overcome. You overcome in the midst of them. And I think that, that is so true.
Yeah. The people in my life that have amazed me are the people whose circumstances have been really tough. And they're in situations that I would never want to have to live through. Yet I'm amazed at how positive they are and how faith-filled they are, And I ask myself often, would I be like that, if I were in their shoes, But they have learned that it's not about your circumstances. It's about who your faith is in. And so they haven't lived their life saying, well, as soon as I get through these problems, I'm going to be an overcomer. No, they're an overcomer in the midst of it, But I love, too, what you're talking about, this idea of how God uses us when we go through the hard times. I think the hardest time in my adult life, and it's one of those things I probably talk about too much. I have a tendency to do that at times. But as an adult, I had two issues in my life that were really rough. One was a concern for one of my daughters, and then there was this other situation, and I carried those for about maybe a year, pretty heavy. And here's what happened to me, though. I realized after going through that situation where I had such concern for my daughter, when I would talk to people who had great concern for their kids, I listened to them at a different level than I listened to anybody else. And I had greater empathy for them than I had for anybody else, probably, greater sympathy and concern. And I think I offered greater counsel to them than I offered anybody else. And so Paul says, God, comes alongside us when we go through hard times. And then before you know it, he brings somebody into our lives who are going through the same hard time, and we end up getting to be there for them just like God was there for us. And I can't tell you, when I go through the difficult times, which none of us enjoy, I'm not ever going to say, hey, God, give me some hard times. I never welcome those. But when I do go through them, I sometimes realize that one day I'm going to be a blessing to other people because I've kind of been tried through the fire on this one, and I'm going to understand them better than I would have before going through this.
Yeah. Man, that's so good. And I started Chris, one of our pastors on staff, and Hannah, they have two little girls, and one of them's almost a year old. Yeah. And they sent us a video of Poppy, which is the youngest one, starting to walk, and then obviously she kind of falls down at the end, but it's real exciting. She learns to walk. And I just started thinking about, it's hard for a baby to start walking. We've been doing it for so long, we just know how to do it. But for a baby, it's tough. There's struggle in it. But what do? We constantly cheer them on. We never say like, well, you've tried for 2 weeks, you're done. How about the rest of your life you just don't walk? No, we constantly continue to coach and uplift them. And part of it is, even if we don't remember, we have been there, right? And I think that it's that kind of thing. Like, hey, we don't give up. We keep moving forward. And eventually we're going to come out on the other side of this, and we're going to help other people do the same. So I think it's really good. And I'm excited about the next few weeks.
Yeah, me too. I think the thing, just to take away from Sunday, sermon is just that, we're all going to go through hard times, but we're not going to go through them alone. God is going to come alongside us. And so the same measure of our hard times is going to be met with the measure of God's comfort, And so what gives me strength to be an overcomer is I'm not by myself. God's with me, and I'm relying on his power and his strength.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm excited about the next two as well.
That's really good. And I think we'll close with this, but I had that idea as I was reading through Ecclesiastes yesterday morning, where Solomon tells us there's a time to mourn, and there's a time to rejoice, and there's a time to cry, and there's a time to laugh. And I thought, man, a lot of times they go together.
Yeah.
And I think that if we're able to remind ourselves we're not just stuck in where we're at, we can continue to trust in God, and he's going to, give us what we need at that time, then we too can be overcomers. So thank you, Pastor Rick.
Hey.
And thanks for being on here. I'm excited, and I think I'll jump on and have someone edit this that's better than me. So, all right, thanks, guys, and share it with your friends. If you enjoyed it, let us know, and you can review it, star it, all that stuff, and we'll talk to you next week.